Hello to all you disciples of Dolby Atmos. We have a very, very special treat for you. The first tech prog death metal album in Dolby Atmos, as far as we know, is on the market for a couple of months already. It's called Changeling, and it's been created, composed, and produced and performed by Master Tom Fountainhead, the 7-string fretless guitar wizard, and Eric Horstmann at Immersive Lab in Berlin. And we had a chance to talk to the makers, learn a lot about the process and the experience to bring death metal into Dolby Atmos. There are two separate conversations because the gentlemen were not able to be in the same room at the same time together because of timing issues, schedules and stuff. But here are two very interesting conversations. Enjoy.
So Changeling found me, or Tom found me. I think he saw a YouTube video on some workflow things that I've been doing, which are now pretty much outdated. So it's time for renewing it. And then he found me on Facebook and just wrote me, "Hey, I have this project. I would love to go Atmos." In the beginning, it was his wish to actually do it on his own, and I would just consult him how to install a studio and make the project. But then we met here in my studio with a test song, because I told him, look, just come over, bring a test song. I've never done anything metal in Atmos. I'm pretty much known for electronic and rap hip hop stuff, a little bit of pop, but it's definitely not my comfort zone. And that was I think that was also my motivation to do this, because I thought, okay, this is something very different to what I usually do in Atmos, so I want to do it, and I definitely want to try it. So we met here in my studio, Immersive Lab in Berlin, and he brought a couple of stems from one of the songs, and we just tried it out. We quickly came to the conclusion that after listening a lot to other metal projects in Dolby Atmos, that there is a lack of a real immersive metal Atmos project. There's a lot of good stuff around, but nothing that has been thought through to be made for Atmos. And the vision that Tom has and Tom had for that project were it has to become an Atmos mix, even though he did not have the capabilities of doing it. But the whole structure, the storytelling, the whole conceptual part of this album has always been done with Atmos in mind. And that's how we started. We opened up one session and just tried out many things. So the idea that we had with Changeling and Atmos compared to what is around on the different streaming platforms was that most of the mixes that we heard were good, no question about this, but we felt that it's made for stereo and then adapted for Atmos. So that was basically what you heard. So it was very front-centric. So a lot of stuff happening in left and right channel. Yes, they pulled out some guitars to the side surrounds, and then it's mainly reverb that has been used to create like a spatial image of those things. And we thought, no, we want to make it different. So we went from instrument group to instrument group and tried out what we could do. Well, obviously, we started with the drums, and then we went also way beyond what we actually then found out that was the good choice. But we really tried to kind of use the whole room, for instance, for the toms. We haven't heard this. So we thought, okay, we have to try this. Yes, we came down and said, okay, it did not work the way that we thought. But still, everything in the drum sound that we have done is already much more immersive than most of the stuff that we found on the platform. And that's how we kind of went from a group of instruments to the next group. And then obviously that genre is guitars. It's pure guitar music, full of guitars. We even came to the point that we decided, okay, Tom, you need to go back to the studio and re-record the whole album for double main rhythm guitar tracks. And so I don't know if that's the correct word, but quadruple. So yeah. Basically we did not have like a double guitar left and right. We even had a double guitar for the rears, which were completely independent. And in some parts of the song, we also had like a triple set for the side surrounds. So in total, we had like 6 rhythm guitars, but all individually recorded. And when you listen to the record, you know how difficult it was for him to re-record the whole thing another 3, 4, 5 times just to have enough material for the room. So that was just one thing. But I mean, and we found these kind of things in every instrument group. We talk about the orchestral stuff. This is not laid out like we know an orchestra, with very front-centric, with the upright bass in the rear left, rear right, and then the first violins in the left. No, here we have the ceiling speakers, the rears, everything, where we still had some space that has not been occupied by the guitars. So that was basically the way how we built the Lego around. More is more.
More is more.
We mixed everything together. That's also something we have to know, that we were sitting 100% of the time together here in the studio, because the music is so complex and detail heavy that I could not do it alone, because I needed him like as a director, more or less. I was the guy who was enabling with the technology of Atmos, but he had the very clear vision of how things should be, and that's what we first tried. And I mean, obviously, a lot of influence also came from me. That's not the point, but I got all the tracks that he has in his Cubase session individually pre-mixed that came out from the stereo version, because even though he wanted to do everything in Atmos first, and everything was, the concept has been built around Atmos, because his lack of technology and limited possibilities of mixing this in Atmos, he first did everything in stereo, but everything was meant to be Atmos anyway. So I got all the pre-mixed elements that he used in his stereo mix. And we found out a lot of his process that he's been doing on individual tracks, EQ, compression, sidechaining, stuff like this, he had to remove it because we had to treat it completely different in Atmos. And that was also a big part of that project, was to go back and forth with all the files, to go back to the original like raw recording and use that in Atmos, because we came up to filter it, to place it, to use it completely different than it would be in stereo, especially with this music. And I remember you saying there's a lot of music is happening per second. So, and that makes it very kind of complex and difficult in that way. One thing made it kind of bit less complex when we were mixing in Atmos was that we decided to, when it comes to movement, we would use objects, obviously dedicated objects, but because the music is so complex and so dense, there's not much movement going on. I mean, you know, like automated movement. The goal was to create a complete like room of sound, as we already said it multiple times, because we don't have one wall. We have 4 walls and the ceiling, which is our room of sound, and try to place everything where it should be and then have it more or less static. But still, it's still, I mean, immersion is not been made by movement. It's been made by, I think, a tasteful placement. If you then add movement, but that is down to the genre, then it's all fine. But it does not require movement. And in this particular project, it's very less movement. There's a couple of stuff that's moving, but it's only what we could call ear candy. There's not important instruments that are moving, because when you move an electric guitar, you can also move a pink noise generator. It's probably the same effect. It doesn't work, especially when you have so many guitars like we had. So overall, roughly, a session had around 120, 110, 120, 130 tracks. The last track on the album, Anathema, it's a 17-minute, roughly 17-minute like epos, where all the influences of the album kind of get like completely mad in the last track. We had more than 200 tracks, 250 tracks, pre-mixed. So in original, I mean, you have to check with Tom how many tracks he had, but it must be 500, 600, 700, I don't know. But it's just a complete madness. It was really mad, but we managed to get it done. And honestly, Pro Tools was just behaving perfectly all the time. I mean, the only issue I had was actually my M2 Ultra. That was kind of at the edge, at the limit. So, and I think one has to do this. An M2 Ultra with full-blown specs was really kind of stuff. But we, you're right, all the instruments that we got in all the individual tracks have been filtered for stereo. So especially guitars are made super thin, because you need some kick drum, some bass, and then some vocals somewhere. So the guitars is just like gluing everything together. So that's why we went back to the original tracks a lot. And the approach was, we spent probably 3 months in just finding the right placement for all the instruments that are happening in this whole album. So where do the vocals sit? You have a shouter, but then you have a singer as well. So it's 2 voices, more or less, in every song. How do we kind of orchestrate the drums? So how big do they sound in terms of room microphones, placement? How far do the toms go, in terms of immersion? Where do all the guitars sit? And then what space is still left for clean guitars, for some strings, for some keyboards and pianos, for some orchestra stuff? So at the end of the day, we kind of figured out, here's an empty space. Let's put something there because we can hear it. Beside all this thing, one thing is very important to know for everybody who's seeing this: please don't listen to this on headphones. It's made for speakers. Usually in stereo, what you do is also do like side chaining and demasking per channel to fit instruments in. And now, because we work in Atmos, doesn't mean that we don't have the same problems now, let's say, on the right side surround. We have exactly the same issues over there. So we were doing track spacing and all kind of stuff for that location and for that location and this location. We were working in a layer approach, in height layers. So on the lower layer, basically, you find everything that is drum shells, bass, and the guitars, the heavy electric guitars, or the distorted guitars. And obviously, and then we kind of worked ourselves up to the top speakers in little slices. So basically, the vocals were also slightly elevated all the time. You don't hear that something's coming from above, but you hear that it's actually differentiating from the guitars a little bit. So that worked quite nicely to lift up by, 5 to 10%. It's not much. But the vocals were slightly lifted, for instance. And that worked quite nicely to still get a feeling of them without fighting too much on the plane. And then the next level was basically synth and pianos stuff. They were a little bit above the vocals. And more or less we end up with the acoustic guitars, which were mainly effect acoustic guitars. They are playing completely in the ceiling, and orchestra parts as well. And we try to find, as I said, the blank spaces in between to fit instruments. Still, we had the issue on the lower plane, on ear level, with all the heavy guitars, with bass and kick drum, as you said, they're fighting. So kick drum and bass, we try to concentrate them more into the center speaker to have left and right available for the front part of the guitar room. And then obviously the side and the rears. In electronic music, I like to also extend the low end to the rear surround speakers, which I have not done here at all, because it would just be too muddy. As you said, it's too quick. It's 64th bass drum thunders at some time, and to stick through. And you're right, the low end is, compared to other genres, definitely underrepresented. But that's the genre. That's how it sounds, and that's all fine, because you also have the growling voices that often take over some low end parts here and there. But I think those height slices, as I would call it, that did the trick in this case. Mm-hmm. But it took quite a long time to get there, because of course we were kind of blending everything together. So, okay, it's fighting. And then I started, okay, let's use this pyramid approach. We have the top speakers. We still had to spread it out on that plane, but then like the pyramid approach or the cube approach, however you want to call it. But that's different from that project to many other projects, that when you solo the top speakers, that you don't hear just a bit of voice and reverb, you hear full content that has been only placed there, and you don't hear it on other channels. But that was the concept. And that also came, as we said, at some point we had to decide for which medium do we do this. Okay. And that was because of the sheer mass of tracks and complexity and density, it had to be this loudspeaker setting. The trade was basically the spatial image overall. We were listening to it on headphones, and then also during the first song I was trying to adapt it also for headphones. And then we switched back to speakers and said, no, it's lacking of immersiveness. It would work for headphone, but then it would be the same boring ideas that we wanted to avoid. for speakers. And then we said, okay, we have to sacrifice it here. Whoever is going to listen to that album on headphones in binaural, I mean, it might work. It'll work to some extent. It's not saying that it doesn't work at all. But we would always be vocal about using a speaker system in some way to really get the benefit of what we were mixing on. For headphones, you can still use the brilliant stereo version. That works beautifully. But we would have to sacrifice spatial placement. So everything that's in the rear and the side would have to be moved back to the front. That is down to the way how binaural audio works in terms of filtering and shaping basically sound that is behind your ears. And then when you have very distorted guitars, which could come close to a pink noise generator in some way, and that in a binaural also distance parameter wise with the binaural metadata settings, it was just not what we wanted to, and the impact was gone, and the punch lacked a lot. Streaming is okay. We found out a couple of issues with a codec that has been streamed with that kind of complex music, because we got the codec at the edge.
Yeah.
So we hear the codec in not the best way. So if that project ever comes out on a Blu-ray, that would be the goal. We're also trying to kind of get the Atmos master files out on Bandcamp one day, so people who have an MKV playback system can basically then download and purchase the more or less high-res masters. That's definitely what we were up for, because we wanted to do something new. I mean, we were on the very kind of shy mission to change the way how Atmos works with metal music, which is not a big goal, no joke, but I think when you have that in mind, you have to sacrifice some things and say, okay, well then it's not going to be the headphone, period. Let's see what the next projects bring. You know, maybe Tom comes up with something, some new projects that are easier to transport on headphones. We'll see when it's done. But we thought that we're kind of some way pioneers in the way how immersive Atmos metal music works. So in that case, we said, okay, let's start with speakers and not overwhelm us and make it even more complicated to make it work in two things. It was complicated enough to get it done on speakers. Sorry. But yeah, I mean, you can stream it on Apple Music onto a sound bar, onto a home cinema system, even in the car. Probably will work better than headphones. I think there were many good reviews and comments on the stereo version. You can check with Tom. But I haven't seen anything on the Atmos version yet. I mean, I'm in touch with a guy in the US who has a big hi-fi immersive kind of blog. And I actually sent him the master files because he was able to play the master files and he really liked it. So he's considering writing something, but not yet. We'll see. We're still pretty niche-y, but it doesn't matter. I will enter it for the Grammys and see. Maybe somebody listens to it and likes it. I don't know. I got all the tracks from Tom, and knowing that it was all Kemper, basically. I mean, I know Kemper. I know the quality of Kemper, and I'm always happy with the quality because most of the amps that he was emulating, a rectifier or something, I knew them as original units because back in the days I was also a guitar head, and I was very surprised how close it was when you know the original unit and then the kind of modulated or the virtualized Kemper way. It sounded just perfect. And for that, what Tom was doing and what we were doing, because of the sheer amount of reamping, new playing, new things like that, it just gave us so much more flexibility in achieving quickly the sound that we needed without big mess of studio gear, microphone, preamp, etc. So but I'm pretty sure Tom can tell you everything about it. But me on the receiving hand, I can just say I was super happy with the quality of the sound. It was just perfect. I'm not 100% sure. I think it was the front and the rears were slightly different. So what was on the front, left, right was what he has been recording for the album anyways. But then we added basically another layer of 2 tracks for the rears. And I'm I mean, we have to listen. Obviously, they're a bit lower in volume than the front, so it's not so easy to compare. But I think the sound was very close, but a little bit different. So he did something to it. I don't know if it was the level of distortion or something, but he can tell you. What we did with all the guitars that he was doing, we were pressing everything into a 6-channel parallel compression guitar foundation along the original guitars, just to kind of create even more density on the lower plane. So that's what I was doing here. And a funny side note is we found this out 5 days before we had to deliver the album. So then we just created a bunch of like track presets and went into all the other sessions and implemented it again. And it was really hot needle, the heiße Nadel. I don't know if that translates into English, but it was really last minute changes until the last day. A lot of big learnings here, how to work with dense material in immersive, not losing the focus, not losing the punch, not losing the structure. And especially, I mean, I learned now how to use an EQ even more than I already did before, but this was definitely next level EQing and placement, yeah. And but I'm very happy that what we achieved, and I hope that whoever's listening to it gives us a thumbs up and likes it.
Hi, my name is Tom Fountainhead, and I'm a fretless and fretted guitar player, composer, producer, mixing engineer, coach for musicians, and sometimes author. And I just released my newest album, Changeling, out on Season of Mist Records. It came out on April 25th. And then also, which is the reason that we're talking now, the Atmos version of the album, Changeling, came out on May 25th, being the first extreme metal album specifically written for and conceived and mixed for spatial audio and Dolby Atmos in particular. I've always, as a composer, I've always struggled with the limitations of the stereo format, both as a composer but also as a producer and mixing engineer. So I've been working on all sides of the fence, so to speak, right? Like in the control room, outside of the control room, in the writing room, and so on and so forth on stage. And the music that I, for better or worse, have in my head, that I tend to like most, is always multi-layered and has a lot of different elements. I've been working with orchestras and classical ensembles in a rock and metal context for a long time, like close to 20 years now. And as anybody will tell you who's worked in rock and metal and, you know, has a love for layering, has a love for complex arrangements and just utilizing classical instrumentation as well as amplified instrumentation, they will tell you that it's very difficult and time-consuming and often expensive to get these multicolor arrangements and ideas into a stereo format. It's just, it comes with the territory. So I've always kind of battled against that. And I didn't have an interest in Dolby Atmos per se at the beginning. I was aware that it happened, that it is a thing, but it just didn't concern me until by chance I got invited to one of the Rammstein record release parties for their latest album, Zeit, here in town. Just by chance, knowing a few people who knew a few people, and then I found myself sitting in a cinema room in a 7.1 Atmos theater, an IMAX theater, listening to this album and had my mind blown just by two things happening at the same time. First, hearing the creative implications immediately of having all this space around you to have different instrumentation come at you from different angles and different sides. Like, for example, on that album, there's also a choir, and then of course, the choir would be coming from above you. So all of that just immediately spoke to me as a creative. And then at the same time, I was fascinated by how big and immense everything sounded, because not only do you have this space creatively, but you also have just more membrane to work with, like in the surround context. So having the biggest drums, the biggest bass, the biggest guitar, the biggest vocal, and then on top of it, an orchestra and a choir and keyboards and effects coexist in a room seemingly without friction, just blew my mind. And I was already working on what became Changeling at that time. And immediately my brain made a connection. Okay, this is what I have to do. It was one of those moments where just the stars aligned and I felt this lightning strike. Okay, I know what the path is. And the small problem was that I didn't have any equipment, any expertise. I had never mixed surround, ever. So I basically set out to write and arrange the album and record it with all of that in mind, not having access to the technology at that time. And when the album was complete, and I had already done the stereo mix, because then I signed the album, had release dates to follow, so the stereo mix came first. Only then I got to actually reach out and see if there was people available and interested in helping me with the actual finalization of that plan that I had in my mind for, at that point, close to 2 years. So then I found Eric just by another pure chance encounter on Facebook, because he had made a post asking people new to the field if they liked feedback and guidance. And I just said, me. So we met up and I presented him, not with general questions, but I just basically kicked in the door, waving a 4/4, being, hey, I got this album. It's written for Atmos. I just didn't have the opportunity. So what do you think? And fortunately, he immediately thought that we should do it together. And the rest, as they say, is history. Because I didn't have the experience in the field, what I brought, like I said, I prepared and recorded and wrote this album in Atmos in my head. So meaning that I would write storyboards, almost like little film scripts where things would happen. But I still mixed it in stereo first. So I did all my usual stuff to it. Like you said, to carve out the thing, to carve out space for everything, because that music, there's a song on it that has 450 tracks of audio in the stereo mix. And so all of that needs to live somewhere. And I did everything that I've learned and more probably in the stereo field, and then brought that to Eric. And quickly then together we realized that it's possible to work with that, but it's not ideal, because all the things that I had done to the material to make it coexist in stereo was not exactly doing the raw tracks any favors. So then the question was, okay, so do we accept that loss of quality? No. Then I need to go back, or we need to go back to the source material. And yeah, somewhere between fully remixing and presenting it for Atmos, we ended up basically retracing my steps from the stereo in the 360-degree space, which was a lot of work. But I think it paid off handsomely. Well, in a nutshell, I think what I brought already, what I had was the what, and I needed the how. So Eric was providing all the how to the what. So, like I said earlier, I had written storyboards, and I had, like, for example, there's the song Abyss, which starts with a choir. And it was always clear to me that the choir would live in the ceiling speakers, and then things would be crashing down at some point. So choir above, there's things like the beginning of the song Anathema, which is orchestrated for, I think in the Atmos version, we have 18 tracks of trombone playing multiple parts. And so the storyline, just from the first musical part in the song is like ba da 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 da, ba da 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 da. So there's already like a spatial story going on of where things start and where things end in multiple parts. There's a flamenco palma group, for the hand percussion, and that's also like 12 to 13 individual mono tracks happening all around you in the Atmos version, so that every single sound you hear is actually pre-planned to live somewhere, roughly. So that was the how things develop, and the that's the what, the why, and then the how. Eric helped me to figure out and brought all these different strategies, sometimes to just say, okay, this is what you want, this is how we do it in Atmos, because I didn't know. And sometimes also saying, well, I know this is what you want, but it doesn't make any sense because of this limitation or this thing that you haven't considered. So it was a very involved process, and we worked tirelessly together on merging these two worlds. But yeah, the basic storyline, as I call it, of how things progress in the 3D space, that was something that I mostly had planned out even before recording the album. Yeah, well, interesting that you would ask that, because it may have even been on that first initial meeting that Eric and I had at his studio at Immersive Lab, where we talked about my idea, and then Eric suggested, well, let's just listen to what's out there. What are other people doing in the genre? Because he also didn't know. That's not his home base genre. And so we just sat down, put on Apple Music, Metal in Atmos, and listened to somewhere between 10, 20, 30 tracks of what was in the playlist. And it was shocking to me that very little was even just decent. Again, not talking about the music, not talking about the quality of the initial productions, but just how metal music, especially extreme metal, was being thought of translating into 360-degree space, and what people were doing to make that transition. Because to me, and I think Eric as well, none of those things were cutting it. Again, not putting down the music, but sometimes you'd have a production that I really loved in stereo, and then it was band up front, orchestra in the back, with like a big abyss in between where the music would fall apart. Sometimes you just have glorified upmixes of the stereo version, phasing and just sounding horrendous. And sometimes you'd have a production where the room was being utilized, but to the detriment of the metal factor, because metal has certain aspects, sonic characteristics that just you need to check those boxes. The characteristic metal guitar wall of sound, how punchy things are to cut through, just certain level of aggression and fullness that we all want. That's why we listen to metal, right? And to our shock, sometimes they just were not present, even though the room was being utilized. So, long story short, we listened to a lot of stuff and then immediately said, well, I think it's up to us to present a vision for how to bridge those gaps with this album. Because I brought the material, I have the opportunity here, he has the experience in the field, so let's just combine forces to present a better version. It really goes back to what I was just saying about the metal aspects of it. So we worked on it, we started working on it, and we built what we thought was the best compromise between the metal aspects of it and the Atmos aspects of it. And pretty early on, we ran into this boundary that I kept saying, well, I want this to be more of a wall of sound, more, and Eric then coined the term, well, we need to go to the room of sound. And it just did not happen the way I wanted to. So all the storyboarding elements were working perfectly, but then suddenly just the guitars and the drums were not engulfing the listener enough. And so we started looking for strategies to change that. And I had all these different guitar tracks, different reamps, different sounds, different guitar orchestrations. And I thought that would be enough, not having worked in Atmos before. And at some point, it just dawned on me that I need to go back and quad track the rhythm guitars, which I hadn't done for the stereo version because it just wasn't, it didn't seem like a good idea. And then I curled up in a little ball in fetus position and wept because after 2 years going back and learning the entire album and re-recording all the rhythm guitars, so that's 60 minutes of music for one side. Part of it is fretless. And it's something that I first did on an album called Acrosis by Obscura back in 2016, where I tried to quad track rhythm guitars on fretless guitar in an extreme metal setting to find out that that's not a great idea. And nobody had ever done that before. And I just found out why, because having 2 fretless guitars in metal, playing power chords, having to be intonated, playing fast rhythm stuff is difficult enough. And at that point, I was the only person in the world doing that. So now here we are 10 years later, and now I actually really, for a legit reason, have to quad track all the fretless guitar tracks. And it was, it was not a good day to realize it, but it was a fantastic day hearing it come together finally after having quad-tracked everything, and then having one dedicated guitar performance in the front right, one dedicated guitar performance front left, one in the back left, one in the back right, and just hearing how that actually created that room full of sound that we were looking for, that made all the difference. Well, happy, yes. I mean, obviously, lots of learnings happening from this one that I will take to the next one. Now, having done it for real one time, and then I can take the results for the next time to just maybe avoid making a few mistakes that I made along the way. But in terms of the bass region, just like you said, the faster the note values, the more careful you have to be. So if you play Changeling in Atmos right after a hip-hop track, a current one, probably you will feel like the sub-region just suddenly disappears. So what I ended up doing was to, in collaboration with Eric, we kept reducing the sub more and more. I remember we had these listening sessions for people at the Genelec showroom presenting the album in Atmos. And after the first couple of sessions, I was actually asking Eric to even reduce the sub amount in the room setup even more, so that the first row would have even less sub, because that sub would then just appear a few milliseconds from the kick drum after the initial hit of the beater, and just making this effect, right? So little things like that you just figure out along the way, that the sub is not your friend for this music. It's great to have it, but it needs to have a specific certain moment. So long story short, the organ will have sub. There's a foghorn on one track that will have sub. There's bass drops coming in, production effects at certain parts in the song to make a big announcement of a new part coming in. That will have sub. But then all the regular playing, the kick drum, we have exclusively fretless bass with all of those things will have very little sub. They will have bass and low bass, but sub is usually something that those don't have. So again, it comes back to having a musical moment and need for it to actually use it, because if you just use it because it's there, it will not be your friend in extreme metal with all the fast subdivisions going on. So that's the solution that we came up with this time. That's something that I keep hearing throughout my career. And I think I've come to the conclusion that I'm a proud hack. I've always been. Like, I'm self-taught on electric guitar. I'm self-taught as a composer. I'm self-taught as a mixing engineer. I'm self-taught as a producer, and so on and so forth. And now mixing in Atmos. To me, it was never a boundary not having done something for the first time. So I'm used to failing and getting up, and I'm used to dabbling in things that I don't really know because I'm interested and curious about it. And so I've also gotten a lot of negative feedback over the years that I then have to overcome. And so I think that ended up being a problem and a negative influence on my self-confidence in my life. But the older I get, the more I reap the rewards of that, because I can think outside of the box in certain areas. And then, I mean, if I have somebody like Eric sitting, to my side, working with me on my music, I can also benefit from these decades of experience of being an actual expert in a field, like I have benefited from having expert composers teach me things and expert guitar players teach me things. And so, yeah, I think it comes down to having a unique thing to say musically, and then not being afraid of never having done it, and being accepting of the fact that you will fail a bunch of times, and then take the lessons and move on. And I think that goes for the entire project. So I don't mean to not answer your question directly, but I'm just thinking with a lot of things I do, I've never set out to break rules. I just did what I wanted to do and want to say, and wasn't afraid to fail and to do things in a different way because it was necessary, and then take the lessons, hopefully. But it's also a question of have you been exposed to a certain doctrine and a certain method of working for such a long time that you can't separate from it. One of the defining moments in my life, for example, was I really wanted to study jazz guitar when I was younger. For all the wrong reasons, but that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to study jazz guitar, prepared, learn piano. That's the one moment where I got a really good teacher and all these things. And long story short, I ended up not doing that. And I was very depressed for a long time, not going down that path. And I have this envy and this appreciation for studied musicians, always thinking that they know something that I don't, and always thinking that I'm not good enough because I have not been taught these things, in an academic way. And what I learned then over the past 20 years of being a professional musician is that that's actually not quite true. It's true sometimes, and in those cases I can ask, I can study. But often the reverse effect is true, that people who have had this great, awesome education have done so at the cost, at the sacrifice of seeing other ways and other methods of doing things. Because what's necessary to study at that level is a dedication and a subservience, I guess is the word, to certain rules and standards that is very hard to unlearn once you learn it. And like I said, there were times in my life where I wished I had that. Now, for example, having done something like Changeling, I don't think so anymore. And I'm glad for being able to just, being able to do things, splash around with paint, to have a visual metaphor, and then just say, well, I think it's a chicken. And the chicken was good. So I don't know what an educated decision would be. Did I know, or did Eric also make me very aware of what that would mean and the potential losses we would suffer from that? We certainly did. Rightfully so. But let me put it this way. I'm an artist first, and this whole thing is born from a vision, certainly not from a commercial endeavor, You don't make an album like that with 7-string fretless guitar playing extreme metal with orchestra and 17-minute songs and 50 guest musicians recording all the orchestra for real, placing it, spacing it out over 5 years. Like, you don't make an album like that, period, if you're interested in commercial success, even though I would not mind more of that, certainly. But then in moments like that where you're presented like with different pathways, do you stick with your vision and stand up for your original thought and idea? Or do you make concessions based on what the market is currently like? Being aware of where you are at and why you're doing things, what your core motivations are, is always helping you to make decisions. And that's something, fortunately, I've been brought back to, and not to make a huge side tangent, but ever since the pandemic, I've been doing a ton of work in the mental health field for musicians, and I've become a coach, creative coach for musicians. And one of the things that I've learned in this work over the last couple of years is that a ton of problems that people face in their careers and their creative lives stem from the fact that they are not aware 100% of what their actual motivations are. Like a classic example is people who are artists but actually just want to have success. They just want to be seen in their hearts. They want to be adored, and they think that as an artist they get that admiration, and they don't. And then their core motivation creates a problem in their life that they can't seem to solve, right? So classic case scenario. In my case, doing this work, I've been brought back to what it actually is that I want to do. And for me, it is always about the vision, as corny as that sounds. And when I have an idea for something artistically, I know myself well enough to trust it to the very end. So in a moment where it's like, okay, so maybe a lot more people can enjoy this compromise if you click this button, or you can stick with your original vision, and then less people will have a way more intense, possibly life-changing experience with hearing your actual vision. Some people may be even completely put off by how far you've taken it. What do you choose? So fortunately, after doing this work, for me, it's like I'm sticking with my vision. And it is interesting, like a couple of weeks back, Eric and I went to MetalCon Frankfurt, which is a new event for metal post-production and mixing and gear. Super cool event. Shout out to Ingo, who's running MetalCon and BeatCon. And so there we were basically going head to head with people on the other side of the spectrum, coming more from an industry perspective, mixing big acts like Opeth and Moonspell and other things, and just getting into contact with them. And the feedback was amazing, because some of those same people who are doing this on a much bigger commercial level were saying, well, I wish other people were having the balls. And that's one feedback I heard privately, right, after these sessions. Like, I wish I would be able to make these decisions the way I want to, but the label or the management or whatever, or even the artist will be afraid of maybe reaching few people. So since I'm used to not reaching people with my music, I just say, fuck it.
Amazing answer.
Well, really. It is what it is.
Cool.
Yeah.
Very good, very good.
And like, don't get me wrong, I would love to reach more people like this. Like, I need to reach more people, but not at the sacrifice of the original idea. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. First of all, the Kemper is the heart of my guitar production and has been for 6-7 years. Let's say 7 years. So spend a lot of time doing different things with it, trying different approaches to double tracking, quad tracking, stereo production, and then the basic concept that I've been developing for my own music is have different guitars that are similar enough with different pickup combinations that are, again, similar enough, but not the same, so that in a stereo context with double tracking, I will have enough sonic variation to make them wider, even if I use the same profile. So that's the first part in a nutshell. Use the same profile for the same sonic characteristics, so like in metal, what's really important is like the palm mutes, dong, 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 dong. So if they need to have a certain characteristic, and if you have wildly different profiles, they may all sound amazing, but in little details like that, there will be like a imbalance in the stereo sides between the guitars. Then you have to employ all sorts of post-processing to kind of rein that in. So what I found for myself is use different guitars that are built and wired to that specific purpose to sound similar enough but different enough, so that when you have a tight performance left and right through the same profile, the same amp sound, then it will take care of the stereo widening and freeing up the mid of the stereo field by itself. So that's been like my starting point. And then for the quad tracks, I've experimented with different things, and actually for the quad tracks, then I ended up not using the same profile. So I discovered that that concept is very great for stereo, but then as soon as you have 4 of them, it reaches its limits. So that's when I go to other sounds. And again, those 2 in the back, they will have the same sound. They will have the same profile and the same characteristic, again, using the different guitars. But they will have a basic foundation that's different from the main stereo pair.
Cool.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
And then all the other guitars in the arrangement will have wildly different sounds and roles depending on what they're supposed to do. So for example, I would never use the same profile with the same EQ shape for a lead guitar on top of 2 rhythm guitars in a track. I know some people do, and then maybe boost the highs with 10 dB or something. That's something I personally don't do. I try to build an arrangement in terms of frequency as much as I can in the classical sense, like, okay, this is the range of guitar 1, and then guitar line 2 will be here, guitar line 3 will be up here. And I try to do the same with frequency and mixing, so that if I have rhythm guitars that are bass and top end heavy and low on mids, like scooped, then the lead guitars will be very mid-rangey and very honky to just by their very nature, by their starting point, fitting into that slot. So that's how I try to avoid too much post-processing.